Hey podcast world, thank you for tuning back into the show. This is part 2 of the Psychotherapist Podcast. In this section of the podcast, we discuss Wim Hof Breathing Technique, which is really quite something else. Dr. Bob describes it as borderline madness. We also discuss the Nemesis Complex, which is my personal theory about using paranoid delusion to your advantage. Finally, we close out with a lot of rants about history. We discuss Tamerlane, who you have probably never heard of, but he killed way more people than Hitler. Not quite as many as Stalin, but definitely more than Hitler, just saying. We'll get a quick word from our sponsors, then we'll bounce into the show. Today's show is brought to you by Faces Brewing Company. Are you fucking sick of wandering out the same fucking place you always go to? I'm sick of the fucking 99, yo. Are you sick of buying the same beer over and over and being a lame plain Jane motherfucker looking for a migraine? Yeah. You don't want to be that guy. You don't want to be a fucking NPC just living your life in a cog machine. Do something different. Check out a 10 out of 10 restaurant, brewery combination. They do brunches every weekend. Check out their menu, check out their beers. Drink, eat, and be merry, my friends. Now enjoy the show. Do you have the singing bowl?
I do.
You want to do it over because I talked while you hit it?
Okay.
That was probably a terrible idea for me to ask you to do that, because I'm sure on the playback you're going to hear my dog pitter-pattering all over the place.
No, I didn't hear it. Like a Pavlovian response.
Trust me, you'll hear it on the tape.
Okay. We should probably say to the listeners that we're discussing a breathing technique developed by what some people consider to be a madman named Wim Hof. And I think it's H-O-F, right?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, whose stuff is all over the internet now. If you can just Google him, you can read about him. And I would not have known about him if I didn't read this book, Breath. And didn't pay much attention to it either because it was just a few pages. But then when I saw the piece on TV, I became much more interested and looked into it a little bit more. The reason he claims that he developed this technique is because his wife killed herself. I don't know if you knew that.
No idea.
He became seriously depressed and found a way to sort of get out of the depression. And that's how he came up with this breathing method. He was looking for some ways to sort of internalize his pain and his depression and find a way to release it. This is what he did.
Maybe the whole thing... Sorry, go ahead.
No, there are many people before him who, in Paris in particular, used this method and studied it at the turn of the century. And there was a book written in 1927 by a guy named Alexandra David Neal. Actually, it was a woman who wrote a book called My Journey to Lhasa, in which she described these techniques that she said few doctors actually believed were humanly possible. That people could breathe alone, keep a body warm in freezing temperatures. But she thought that it had some contributions to the immune system, and so did he. And I think it probably does. I just think it's such an aggressive technique, it has to do something. So,
maybe.
If anybody's interested, look him up.
It's really, I didn't know about the whole it came out depression thing. Maybe the holding your breath part was him just continually trying to kill himself.
Yeah, well, people said that she killed herself because of him, because he was so crazy. So that you know, those are anecdotal stories.
Ouch.
Yeah.
That one's gotta hurt.
I mean,
And maybe that bitch was just crazy. Why'd she kill herself?
well, they say it's
How'd she
because of him.
kill herself?
I have not yet seen the method of how she killed herself. But they had children, but he was apparently into doing these very strange things. Kind of, she saw it as self-centered, you know, promoting himself by doing this technique and inviting people to watch him jump into it too, you know, bad advice, things like that.
Oh, she's just jealous.
Yeah, she's just jealous.
What a hater.
Yeah, she was a hater.
Yeah, she's in hell right now. Fuck her.
Yeah, one theory is that he did all this to try to kill himself, you know, just to sort of get rid of his guilt, but I'm not going to go by the whole book on him if there is one.
Yeah.
I just find it very interesting, though, that you and another patient both, within maybe 10 days, sent me something on him.
That's a crazy coinky dink.
Yeah, it's hot. It's got to be hot on the internet. I'd love to have a three-way with you, me, and Harry Potter discussing this. See what he knows about it.
Yeah. He wants to get into the whole ice thing too, but he's waiting for things to warm up. I would worry about doing it during the winter. Like, after you've gotten used to it, fine, but to start there, I feel like is inviting pneumonia.
Yeah, well, it's a shock to the system as well. And, you know, the other thing is you really have to be in great shape. Is Harry Potter in great shape?
He's in good shape.
You have to be in good shape to do this.
For the record, audience, in case you heard that was not me who farted, it was my dog. Sorry,
Okay.
Continue, Bob.
I didn't hear it. Then it wasn't me. Okay, yeah, we're kind of getting into a lot of things here I hope people find interesting. I am. How about you, Malcolm?
Man, it's just a groovy fucking day. I feel like a fucking sultan right now just because I'm out of my... I started bringing a pillow out to my back porch, so I'm literally... This is the first time I'm lying down during a session.
Okay.
And, yeah, just enjoying the fresh fucking air, man. So I'm not even thinking about... the pod. What pod? We're on a podcast? Oh, fuck, there's a mic.
Yep.
So, there was another topic that I think I had on my list. What was the first item on my list? Let me pull it up. Because right now...
I have you against Wim Hof.
Right.
And you have
Oh, that's right. Okay,
the
yeah.
Nemesis Complex.
Yeah. So, the Nemesis Complex is something I think I've had on and off throughout different periods of my life. I would say around 2015 when I started getting into the news more and taking that more seriously. It would get into my head more where I would just be thinking, I think, more about sort of just catastrophic events happening. Like, for example, during that time there was a lot of jihadist violence in Europe, and ISIS, you know, turned out not to be so scary, you know, at least from an American perspective, but for a while it put me in a mindset where, you know, it felt like being, you know, the country was at war a little bit, like a wartime kind of mentality to it. I also had, you know, a period where when I first saw the Richard Spencer video, you know, hailing Trump in victory and all that shit, and I thought the Nazis were going to be taking over the country.
Yeah.
You know, it instilled in me a sort of sense of an other, that there was just really shitty, awful people in the world that are, you know, not necessarily out to get me specifically, but they're indiscriminate and they're evil, so they'll come for me eventually. And I find this actually kind of during these periods, I felt more motivated just to be better physically and mentally and be more disciplined. And I guess my question to you is it healthy to imagine an enemy that is not even really going to get me if it motivates better performance?
Well, I would say that if you put it in the category of performance enhancing, whatever you want to call it, material performance enhancing, whatever. It's
motivation.
Motivation, yeah. You're talking about if whatever can enhance your performance is usually a good thing, except for some of the drugs people use, obviously.
Yeah.
I mean, there are a ton of performance enhancers, that people use every day, but they don't recognize. But if that, just the thought, I think you're talking about fear, basically you felt fear of what might happen.
Fear and competitiveness, because, it wasn't a sense of, like, doom so much as a sense of, like, just having to fight back mentally. And I just think it does tie into, I think there's just something beautiful about competitiveness in general that, just pushes shit to a new limit. But the reason it came back to me, because it's not something I really felt for years, and the only comparable thing I experienced is when, on the opposite hand, just trying to impress, a chick or whatever, like obsessed with Megan back in the day. That was like the only thing that was of comparable motivation, where I just wanted to kind of outdo myself. But the reason it all came back was I was listening to a podcast with Michael Malice and Jesse Kelly, who I'm sure I've mentioned Malice plenty of times, but Jesse Kelly's relatively new to me. He's got his own podcast and whatever, and he's like a conservative dude, but he's pretty fair-minded and talks a lot about history, so I like him. But he had this line where, he was talking about sort of some of the shit we were talking about, as far as how people just nowadays don't think about, I guess, the worst case scenario. And he said, you may not care about the commie, but the commie cares about you. And I'm like, that motherfucker, he's so goddamn right, I hate him.
Right. Yep.
So I don't know, man, maybe I just need to get back into a more disciplined mode, because lately it's just been a lot of weed, and I'm still, working on my programming and stuff, but this week I got sucked in again a little bit into the Age of Empires fucking game. But it's weird, because the last time I got sucked into it, so there are different ways to win the game, and the most typical way is just burn down the enemy's camp, and that's it. But there's also a game scenario where your civilization amasses a stupid amount of resources and build a building that's called a wonder. And that'll set a timer, and once the timer goes down, if you don't destroy the wonder, the game, the person who built the wonder won. And both times I got sucked into this fucking game, they were wonder scenarios. One was, in Mongol versus China, the other was the Huns invading Italy. I don't know what it is about playing as nomadic horse steppe people that just need to burn down really impressive buildings, but that gets into my head, bro. Also because they're really hard missions, I guess. But what's your psychoanalysis of that?
Oh man, I don't know. It's an aggressive fantasy, that's for sure.
I guess, yeah.
It's among your repertoire. You have a few, but that sort of rage and burn and scorched earth is one that you use a lot. And the vision of that must come to you quite often. And I would just ask, what's generating this? Where the hell is this coming from? is it out of a sense of fear, or worry or concern that there are a lot of people out there who like to do harm to us?
I got no idea. I don't know, man. I think it was also just, I forgot that it was a game that I played, like, almost 20 years ago as a fucking kid, and it's part of what inspired my interest in history. And it's just a fun game, but...
I mean, that's very interesting to think that some of those games, I think Game of Thrones, actually some of those games do inspire people to learn more about history.
Yeah, and
for you, that's been a positive.
Oh yeah, I mean the game itself isn't very historically accurate, and I'll try not to nerd out too hard right now, but there's just one detail I fucking love that I gotta mention because it's my favorite example of historical inaccuracy in a game. So there's a Joan of Arc campaign, and I learned not until actually recently that Joan of Arc was against spilling blood herself. Supposedly she carried a sword but never used it, and kind of just held a standard and tried to encourage the soldiers and all that shit. But in the game, you can like have a little Joan of Arc figure running around and just have her single-handedly slaughtering peasants.
In the game, but in true history, real life, she was not a killer?
From what I understand, correct.
Wow. I never knew that.
Yeah, but I mean, it has been a benefit because on my deep dive for this week, I picked Tamerlane, and Bob, I just gotta tell you, it drives me crazy how fucking obscure this guy is. When, let me put it this way for you, Stalin killed 20 million people. He had guns, he had bombs, he had trains to leave plenty of people off in Siberia. He had a lot of tools, and he killed 20 million people, the estimates are. Tamerlane lived at the very end of the 1300s and had fucking bows and arrows, and guess how many people he killed?
Twice as many.
No. Genghis Khan did, but Tamerlane killed 15 million fucking people, and in his towards the very end of his life, he was he had already accomplished a shit ton, but he wanted to try to outdo Genghis Khan, so his last grand finale was supposed to be invading China, but he caught a cold because he invaded during the winter and died, and that was just kind of the end of it. But if he lived and succeeded in China, which he very may well have, considering his record beforehand, I think he could have outdone Stalin.
Wow.
I mean, if you're invading China, I mean, that's where you add your body count. If you successfully conquer it, just
that many people.
Oh yeah.
Just for those of us who don't have a clue who Tamerlane is, can you spell that person's name for us?
T-A-M.
Tell us what he did, what he was known for, basically.
I'll give you the short version, but
Yep.
it was Tamerlan.
Tamer.
Yep.
Yep.
Lan.
Lan.
He has a bunch of different names, and he's known as Timur the Lame because he was a fucking, part of why he's so impressive to me is that he's one of those conquerors who wasn't like Alexander the Great, born into royalty and inherited a super awesome army. He was a fucking goat thief that took an arrow to the fucking hand and thigh while stealing livestock and was a cripple, and went from like having 7 followers at some point for whatever reason to basically killing 15 million fucking people and conquering. He was from modern Uzbekistan, which is probably part of why he's so obscure, just because I don't know how many Uzbek Americans there are, but I watched a great documentary where they, go to the countryside where he grew up, and they still play a game where, they're all on horses and they're dragging a dead goat carcass around, and it's this really intense game, and they used to play it with dead enemy chieftains, but I guess they're not. I guess they got a little more civilized.
Do this today?
Yeah, there are still people who play this game where they're just like playing soccer with a fucking goat carcass on horseback. It's wild.
And this is a tribute to this guy?
I mean, it was a game that was before this guy's time, but, you know, I think it's just a tradition of, you know, these nomadic steppe people that have been doing this shit for thousands of years.
You have a soft spot in your heart for those nomads, don't you?
I don't think so necessarily, because the Romans were not nomadic at all, but I definitely got a soft spot for them too, you know?
So if you could go back to an era like that HBO show, I don't remember, Westworld or whatever it was, you know, you could go back into a certain place in time and put yourself, would you choose the Roman period?
Probably. It's a really, really hard question to answer, because are you asking for like just to spend a lifetime in, or for like a singular event?
Let's just say plunk me back there for a period of time. Let me live there and experience it. With a safety valve to get out when you've had enough of it.
And of course modern medicine and guns and all that good shit, but yeah, I would probably just have to put myself, I want to say late Roman Republic, like probably during Caesar's lifetime. If I had to pick one, you know, it might as well be the big blockbuster. Although there's a whole few decades before that would be absolutely beyond fascinating, but they're a bit more obscure. And there's like, you know, 100 years after that, the War of the Four Emperors and like all kinds of crazy shit. But if I would want to just see Caesar for myself, you know what I mean? I would want to get like some just sense for this guy, because I mean, he was just so goddamn charismatic. He could make fucking, you know, it wasn't just that he was a good general on the battlefield. He had situations where his army, for example, when they invaded Germany, were beyond terrified to even fucking go in there in the first place, you know. And he was that guy who was for years and years like, I'll pay you just one more campaign, you'll get your land, it's fine. And then they fucking rebel against him, and then he has to like beg them, you know, win them over again. And just, he was just so much more than just like a military guy. He like he didn't complete it, but he basically reinvented the calendar and was like a philosopher. And so it was, you know, he was a great thinker, great writer, great speaker.
Developed roads, water systems, all of those things, right?
I'm sure he improved it all. Also, he threw on the most craziest gladiator games of his era, to the point where the Senate was like, this is a national security threat, you're bringing way too many gladiators into the city.
Yeah.
Like, he drained a lake and had a naval battle, so he put on a lot of great shows, and I think that's part of why I would pick that era as well.
Okay. Did he put on better shows than Caligula?
Probably.
Okay.
I think Caligula's more like, I can't remember, I'm sure he, you know, did plenty of games and whatever, but he was more of just like, I'm gonna torture my slaves in the palace kind of guy.
Right.
Caesar wasn't like that. He was actually, I mean, to be clear, just it's the standards of the time, he could be genocidal, but he was actually known for, you know, unusual clemency.
Right, and there was also, under Caligula, there was the senatorial brothel, where the brothel was all the wives of the senators. He had a very twisted sense of humor, Caligula.
It gets so debauched, like, as you just read through, not even just Caligula, like, there was, I can't remember his name, but there was a later one who literally would go into the city as a prostitute. Like, he would pretend to be a prostitute dressed as the emperor, and then after he fucked someone, he'd be like, hey, guess what? You fucked the emperor in the ass. Like, you know, fucking Nero would dress up like a lion and bite people's genitals off. They were some very bizarre people.
Yeah, they were very bizarre. They were very bizarre. Makes you wonder if they were, ingesting any substances that made them act like that. But
I think it was a combination of, the worst ones were usually inherit way too much power, way too young.
Yeah.
And it just, I think it goes to their head. There is the whole argument that lead poisoning led to the end of the Roman Empire, but I mean, lead pipes were there before the empire and through the empire and after the empire, and they were aware that it was probably not, the best thing health-wise, but the average lifespan was like 30 anyways, and people need water, so fuck it.
Yep. That's an interesting point, that they were young. They were very young.
I mean, I just think if you gave me absolute power at 14 years old, I would just be such a little monster.
Yeah, exactly. Either that or you'd be so influenced by these other people telling you to do certain things that you'd be so confused, you just start saying yes to everything.
Oh, absolutely. And then just escaping to the, harems and stuff, and to escape thinking about it. And I mean, that's a huge part of just what corrupts, like, for example, the nomadic empires, the Mongols, Genghis Khan, he wore garments made out of fucking clothes sewn out of field mice. That's how fucking poor, the Mongols were. They kind of leaned into extreme poverty. Whereas, his fucking children, he said, I wear these clothes, my children will wear, Chinese silks, they'll eat off Persian gold, and they will forget who they fucking owe it all to. And he was right.
Yeah, and I think, when you look at this thread of this sexuality and, the sexual behavior through all of those leaders at that time, I mean, it was just such a component.
Well, when you're so...
lewd and lascivious debauchery, basically.
I mean, I think when you're so aware of mortality, I think you just push the limit while you can.
You know what? I think that's a pretty heavy statement that we should probably end on. Okay?
Well, I try to get into the mindset of these people, and it's something I'll talk about in my Legio X podcast, but the very first, sentence of the book I read that inspired the whole thing was, "It was a good day to die." And it's on the eve of a big battle, and immediately I debate to myself, really? Is that really all their attitudes? Chances are, actually, after I thought about it, for some of them, probably, yeah.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, everyone fucking dies young, so it's like, how do you live? You live your life. You must live your life just very differently.
Absolutely, your expectations are different. Your end line is, in sight very quickly. Death is not a long ways away. It's fairly close.
Yeah.
And I'm listening with a third ear as a therapist should to our discussion here, where that has a hell of a lot of content, and I'm looking for threads or something commonality, and we start talking about, Hof, basically kind of a madman who, is very aggressive, and when people, if they see him, he looks like somebody you would want to mess with in a bar. It comes up with a technique that sort of quiets the mind in a certain way, And throughout our discussion, we've got these themes of violence or, aggression or fear of aggression. And I don't know where that's coming from, but I just think it's trended throughout the podcast here.
It's just, I think I read the Gulag Archipelago, and there's a part where they get to the death camp, and they ask one of the guys who's there, and I think Solzhenitsyn was kind of doing it, as a semi-fictional just representation, but in that particular instance, but they ask, isn't there any law here? And one of the prisoners just goes, don't ask such stupid fucking questions. There's only one law here, and that's of the jungle.
There you go.
And
there you go.
I mean, and that's just true of 99.9% of human history, so
yes,
it's hard to completely It's hard for someone like me to completely ignore that, but I don't
Yep.
obsess over it. I'm not like waking up like, the commies are taking over.
The interest in history. I'm gonna hit my singing bowl here in a second to bring this to a close, but can we talk offline for a couple of minutes?
Go for it.
Okay, so I'm gonna just end with the singing bowl. Thanks for listening, friends and neighbors. We're not crazy. We call ourselves the psychotherapists. It's tough to know who the therapist is and who the patient is, but I hope you've enjoyed this discussion today. Do you have anything to add, Malcolm?
I like to think that I am the psycho part and you're the therapist part, and that's why it works.
That's how we've set it up. Okay.
Yeah, but thank you everyone for listening. It's always appreciated. I hope it was entertaining. You got something out of it.
Okay, Malcolm, I'm going to bring us out, and then you stay on so we can talk offline, okay?
All right, sounds good. Peace out.
Bye.